thank you for coming. Today we will hear first kind of small lecture from cycle, which we were preparing. Actually, we asked Leonid to do it because he has specific gift and history. Especially, he did a lot of research in history of Second World War. And today it's his first talk about Brest Fortress. And I thought I know a lot about it because I was studying also, and my grandfather was history teacher. But after I heard this small talk, I was amazed how much things I miss. And therefore it will be very interesting. Please.
I will be talking today about the defense of the Brest Fortress, which is one of the most wide-known heroic stances of the Soviet Army during World War II. Now, before I begin, I would like to clarify something. During World War II, there was a country, the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was Russia and 14 other countries combined: Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and others. So, I will address the Soviet Union as the Soviet Union in this presentation. So, the Brest Fortress, the history of the legendary fortress. Now, in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. This was the beginning of World War II for the Soviet Union. This, over here, the picture that you see on the top, is the plan of the invasion of the Soviet Union by Nazi Germany. The leader of Nazi Germany was Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler believed that after 4 months of combat, the Soviet Union would be defeated. It would cease to exist. Well, already in the first days of war, he was proven wrong by a group of brave soldiers in the Brest Fortress. And below is an image of German tanks advancing through the Soviet Union in 1941. Hitler's plan was to dominate the whole world and to spread Nazi ideology everywhere. Now, before I begin talking about the events of June 1941, I will have to go back in history a little, since the Brest Fortress by itself has a very rich history. Now, the fortress itself was made nearly 100 years before the events of 1941. Above is the image of the Russian Empire. That's what Russia was 200 years ago, the Russian Empire. And the fortress was built in approximately 1842. The fortress for its time was very good. It was very strong, it was very well prepared, and it was on the territory of modern Belarus. Ironically, even though the fortress was on the borders of the Russian Empire, it did not see any combat for nearly 90 years. Even during World War I, when the German army, when it invaded the Russian Empire, was very close to the fortress, the Russian army surrendered the fortress and gave it to the Germans. Why? There was a plan for the Russian army to retreat to a special line of defense, and the Brest Fortress was not on that line of defense. Now, near the end of World War I, the Russian Empire collapsed. A lot of new countries formed on the ruins of the Russian Empire. One of these countries was Poland, and the Brest Fortress became part of the now Poland. Now, when the fortress became part of Poland, the Polish decided to reinforce the fortress, to make it even stronger, to make it safe for its soldiers. Why? Well, because I will have to show you. If this sheet of paper is Poland, then the Brest Fortress is on this side, and the Soviet Union is on this side. And the Soviet Union and Poland were not in good relations. And Poland did not want to get invaded by the Soviet Union. which is why the Brest Fortress and many other fortresses, which were formerly fortresses of the Soviet Union, were modernized. Now, above you can see an image of the German invasion of Poland in 1939. Why did I put that picture there? Well, because when World War II began, it began by Germany invading Poland. Poland was invaded by Germany, and you see, Poland was conquered by the Germans very, very quickly. Why? The Polish army was not ready to defend. The Polish army was weak compared to the German army. The German army was vastly superior. And if the Germans invaded from the west, which in this case is the left side on the image, and the fortress was on the right side, on the eastern side, in a couple of weeks, the Germans were right at the fortress. Now, when the Germans reached the fortress, they offered very good terms of surrender to the soldiers in the fortress, the Polish soldiers who were defending the fortress. Now, there was nearly 400 Polish soldiers in the fortress, and there were approximately 15,000 German soldiers at the fortress, so the odds were not in favor of the Polish soldiers. And by the way, the general who commanded the Germans there was one of the most legendary commanders of World War II. His name was Heinz Guderian. Heinz Guderian is known as one of the best tank officers in history. He is basically the person who recreated the German army, who made the German army strong again. And as I said, the odds were not in the favor of the Polish. The Polish had two choices. First, surrender. Second, to fight. They chose to fight. For a week, the fortress was constantly bombed by aviation, was constantly shot upon by artillery, and in the end, the Polish had to surrender. Because there was no other way for them to live. Most of them didn't want to die. Now here, I will have to say something very interesting. You see, Poland was not completely occupied by Germany when it was invaded by Germany in 1939. You see, before September 1st, 1939, that's when Germany invaded Poland, on the 16th of August, 1939, in Moscow, a little document was signed between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. This document officially split the countries between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union into two areas. Areas of domination. So kind of like the Cold War, when the United States had its satellite states, and when the Soviet Union had its satellite states, which both of the countries would control. Now, Poland was to be divided in half. Half, the eastern half of Poland, went to the Soviet Union, and the western half went to Germany. Here, this is perfectly shown in the image below. Now, why did this happen? Why didn't Germany just take Poland completely? It could have. Well, Hitler had a plan. Hitler wanted to trick the Soviet Union's leader, Joseph Stalin, into believing that there would be peace between them, that he wouldn't invade the Soviet Union, that it would be no war, just peace. That's why he gave half of Poland to Stalin. He also gave him 3 other countries, which soon became part of the Soviet Union: Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And officially, half of Poland was now part of the Soviet Union. Now, why did I say that? Well, because the fortress became part of the Soviet Union's territory. It was on the eastern side of Poland, as I said before. So now, it was a fortress of the Soviet Union. Above, that is the image of the moment when the document which was signed about splitting up most of Europe. It was called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Why? Well, as you can see, the man in the glasses over there who's looking down at the papers, that's Vyacheslav Molotov. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Soviet Union. So that's why one half of the document is called Molotov. And now behind Molotov, the guy in the dark suit with a tie, that's Joachim von Ribbentrop. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Germany. Ironically, before he became the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the German Reich, that's how Germany was called, he was a champagne salesman. So, you know, very big promotion there. Oh, and that man on the right, you see the man with the big mustache? That's Joseph Stalin. That's the leader of the Soviet Union. Now, Hitler isn't in the image because the document was signed in Moscow. And Hitler never went to Moscow, not even when he invaded the Soviet Union. He never reached Moscow. Now, below is an image of a very rare event that happened in history, which was not remembered for 70 years. No one talked about the event, not even the people who participated in it. I will tell about this event. So, when the Brest Fortress was given over to the Soviet Union, there were still German soldiers in the fortress, and they decided to conduct a parade, which included German soldiers and the Soviet soldiers. It had soldiers from both sides, tanks, artillery, sort of like the Victory Day Parade, but it's not one army, it's two armies, which would soon become enemies. Here, on the right of the image, that's mostly Russian and Soviet officers. On the left, mostly German officers. The parade happened on the 22nd of September, 1939. And the Brest Fortress officially became part of the Soviet Union. Now, when Hitler conducted his little plan, it didn't really work. Why? Well, because Joseph Stalin was not a fool. Stalin was a very skilled, very strategic politician. He was very, very smart. And he knew what Hitler's plan would be. Hitler would eventually turn around and invade the Soviet Union. And so what did Stalin do? That's right. He started rebuilding the military. He started getting more soldiers into the army. And, again, he modernized the Brest Fortress. So, you know, every time a new country gets the Brest Fortress, it gets modernized. New cannons, new guns, everything. Yes? So now, as I said, right before the war, the fortress was modernized again. It was renovated. Well, and it was being prepared for active combat. Above is the image of the Brest Fortress around summer 1941, so a couple of weeks before the actual war started with Germany. The fortress is in pretty good condition, and below is just some soldiers next to an aircraft gun in the Brest Fortress. By June 22nd, the Brest Fortress had 3,000 people in it. Most of them were civilians, families of the soldiers and of the officers. Why? Well, it was a tradition back then. If you moved to somewhere, say the Brest Fortress, you have to bring your family with you. It would be easier for you to live with them. They can cook for you, they can live with you, you can be in one big family. So there wasn't a lot of soldiers in the Brest Fortress, but there was enough ammunition. And when the war began, on June 22nd, 1941, the fortress was immediately fired upon by the German artillery and bombed by the German aviation. Now, I would like to specify a little bit why the fortress is so important. On the top, we have the map of modern-day Belarus. The Brest Fortress is now on the territory of Belarus. Now, approximately over here, on the border with Poland, you see a little red dot, which is Brest. Right? Yes, that's Brest. It is right on the border. And also, the Brest Fortress is connected to a lot of road networks. It's connected to a lot of road networks. So if you control the fortress, you control a lot of roads, which means that your army can move further. And The main German attack came through Belix. So the order was to not have any pockets of resistance in the back. Also, the Brest Fortress would have been a great supply depot. Since it was a fortress, it was in a very good area, it had roads, it had rivers, and soldiers could stay there safely. And to make the point again, the fortress was so important that when the fortress was finally captured by the German forces, Adolf Hitler and his ally Benito Mussolini personally visited the fortress in August 1941. This is an image of the visit of the Nazi leaders to the Brest Fortress. In the front, that's Benito Mussolini. And over here, that's Adolf Hitler. This is a little map of the fortress to show you how it looks like. So on the left, it is how the fortress looked like in 1941. And on the right, that's how the fortress looked approximately in the year 1900. As you can see, not very big changes were made to the fortress, but in fact they were very sufficient. The walls were made even thicker, there were more roads made, there was a whole canal dug up, and as you can see, the main fortress, the main citadel, that's how you call the main part of the fortress, was very far away. It was very far away from the actual borders of the fortress. Now, on June 22nd, as I said, the fortress was bombed and fired upon. But it wasn't fired upon by simple guns and simple weapons. Above is the German vehicle called Karl. Now, these vehicles were very big. Each of them weighed at least 30 tons. The cannon was 540 millimeters, so if you imagine the cannon in front of you, the actual hole from which the shell comes from, the explosives, it was 54 centimeters wide. It has a very big gun, very big. And there were 6 of them made. And 2 of them were shooting at the Brest Fortress on the 22nd of June, 1941. Below is an image of the Brest Fortress on the 22nd of June. As you can see, a lot of damage is being done. Now, the fortress was fired upon for a couple of hours. The Germans didn't want anyone to be alive in the fortress. They wanted everyone to be dead. When they thought that everyone was dead, they got 20,000 soldiers to walk towards the fortress and to look if there was anything left which could be used. Food, ammunition, anything. The German soldiers thought that this would be a happy walk. You know, everyone is dead, we can simply walk, no one will shoot at us. As soon as they approached the fortress, they were opened fire. They were opened fire upon. The Germans realized that the defenders were still there. What did they do? Well, they cut off the fortress from the rest of the army. The fortress was now all by itself. For the rest of June 1941, the fortress did not surrender. It was constantly being bombed upon, constantly being fired upon. Above is an image of the German dive bombers, Stückes, approaching the borders. Now, these bombers they're not the most effective bombers, but they had one very interesting touch to them. They had sirens installed. So usually, when a plane flies, it doesn't make any noise. This plane made a lot of noise, especially when it was diving. When it was diving, it made a very horrible noise, which was basically a siren, and which was a very big psychological weapon against the soldiers, which it was being used against. Now imagine, the soldiers and the officers which were in the Brest Fortress were usually attacked 5 or 6 times a day, and they were constantly being bombed. Imagine staying in there for at least a day. There's constantly sirens wailing, there's constantly explosions, someone is constantly dying. It's not very good. And so the defenders suffered very, very heavy casualties. And eventually they were running out of water, food, and medicine. As I said already, they were cut off from the rest of the army. The situation was very grim, but they didn't give up. They continued fighting. Below is an image of the Brest Fortress near the end of June 1941, and those are Russian soldiers trying to hide from the approaching bombers. By the end, most of the fortress was destroyed by the shooting and by the bombing, but the Soviet soldiers did not. They continued fighting. Now, July got even worse for the Soviet soldiers. They had no food, they had no medicine, they only had water. And the water supply was being destroyed, since the Germans had placed special chemicals into the water to poison the water. The soldiers and the officers still were not given up. Now, I would like to point this out. None of the soldiers surrendered by their own will. And that I mean, none of the soldiers just gave up and went, I surrender. No. They were taken prisoner only if they were unconscious or wounded so much that they just couldn't move. As one German officer later recalled, we took no prisoners for many days, and when we took one prisoner, that prisoner tried to commit suicide. During this time, a relatively big group of soldiers decided to try and escape. They were the lucky ones. They escaped, but they didn't get to their own forces. They didn't get to their army. They stayed there for the rest of the war as guerrilla fighters, partisans, partizani. That's how they were called. Now, below is a painting. This painting is a very famous painting, especially in the Soviet Union, because it is a painting of the defense of Brest Fortress. In my opinion, it shows the events that were happening in the fortress very well. It shows the defenders were dying, they were wounded, they had nothing, almost nothing left, but they were still fighting, they were still going. They offered good terms of surrender every day. So every day they would go on saying, please surrender, we will let you live, we know that you have families in there, we will let them live too, we will give you food, we will give you shelter, you will not die. And as I said before, the majority of the people in the fortress were civilians. They were mothers, they were grandmothers, they were children, so mostly only children. And the officers and the soldiers made a decision. They decided to get their families to surrender. Since the Germans were offering good terms of surrender, they will let their families go, but the soldiers will stay and continue to fight. The families went, they raised the white flag, they went to the Germans, but instead of upholding their promise, the Germans sent them to a concentration camp. And later, each and single person was executed in February 1942. Above is an image of some of the people in the concentration camp. Life in the concentration camp was absolutely horrible. The people were in there had to work, they were not given enough food, not enough shelter, and there were experiments conducted on them. Experiments which later got a lot of the Nazi scientists and Nazi generals to be executed for crimes against humanity. And below is an image of some of the children which were in the Brest Fortress in a concentration camp. This is the only picture taken of the members of the families of the soldiers of the Brest Fortress. The soldiers were still not surrendering, and it had been a month. Now, here I would like to show you some of the heroes of the Brest Fortress. I could not get all of the heroes of the Brest Fortress on this slide, because that would mean that we have to get at least 1,000 people on the slide, which is impossible, because every single soldier who was there was a hero, because he did not surrender. They fought till the end. Now, the first person on the very left is Major Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov. He was the commander of the fortress, even before the war began. He was the person in charge. He later became known as the last defender of the fortress, because he was the last person who was found here, alive. We will talk about him more later. This man is Captain Ivan Mikhailovich Zubachov. As I said, the fortress was being constantly shot and fired upon, which meant that the resistance eventually was separated. The soldiers were separated. They were forming into smaller and smaller groups. And Zubachov commanded one of these groups. He was on the eastern side of the fortress. His group fought almost 24 hours a day, non-stop. They were the ones who had the most German soldiers attacking them. And on the very right is possibly one of the greatest heroes, Commissar Fomin. Now, here I would like to say that in the Soviet army, there were political officers. Since the Soviet Union was a communist country, it was a country that was very heavily focused on ideology. We do not have that here. We do not have political officers, we do not have commissars, but in the Soviet army, in the Soviet Union, we did. The party was the main group in charge. And he was the person who would talk to the soldiers, who would educate them on ideology, who would help them, who would raise their spirits. So he was kind of like a supervision, or you can put him as an assistant to the main commander, Major Gavrilov. Now, Commissar Fomin did a lot of things in the fortress. Not only did he command his own group of soldiers who defended the fortress, he was also in charge of the hospital for the soldiers that were wounded, for the family members before they left who were wounded. So he did a lot of things. And also, Commissar Fomin was Jewish. His name was Yefim Moiseyevich. So there was an order in the German army, a supreme order made by Hitler himself, to execute every single political officer and every single Jewish person if they were caught in the Soviet army, since Nazi Germany was very anti-Semitic, which meant that they were against the Jews. And Fomin, instead of fighting, he said, one soldier remembered exactly what he said. Fomin said, "I'm a Jew, and I'm a commissar. Come on, shoot me. Shoot me." He was shot. He was so weakened by the defense because, as I said, no food, no water, no medicine, that he couldn't even stand. It got him to get on his knees, and that's when the Germans shot him. Now, the last battle. On July 24, 1941, the Germans officially declared the fortress to be safe. Why? Because, as they said, the last defender was taken prisoner. And defender was Major Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov. He was the last person that they found alive in the fortress. Now, he did not give up without a fight. Even though he was on the brink of death because of hunger, he had 2 grenades with him. And he threw those 2 grenades at the approaching German soldiers. So he killed 10 German soldiers, and he was still taken prisoner only after he fell unconscious. Below is the image of German soldiers carrying him in a bag from the Brest Fortress. Now, officially, this was the last combat ever seen in the Brest Fortress. That's not true. The German soldiers who were stationed there were constantly being killed even after that. This is the official end date of the defense, but until February 1942, there were still people in the fortress and they were still fighting. We don't know their names. We don't know what happened to them. These are the unsung heroes of the Brest Fortress. And as I said before, even Adolf Hitler and his close friend, the leader of fascist Italy, Benito Mussolini, visited the fortress in August of 1941. Now, this image that I'm showing you over here is not very clear. It is the most famous piece of the defense of Brest Fortress. It is the image of the soldiers, the psychological portrait of the soldiers, why they stood, why they never surrendered. And the words written on there are very simple. I am dying, but I'm not giving up. Goodbye, motherland. This was written by an unknown soldier, and it was written in the soldier's blood on one of the walls of the Brest Fortress. These people never gave up. These people continued fighting on and on, defending their motherland from the fascist invaders. And one of the main lessons that this episode of history can teach us is that if you fight for the right cause, no one can beat you. Not cannons, not enemy soldiers, not bombs, nothing. Even God will help you defend the fortress. And another point is that the Germans were absolutely wrong that they could invade the world and dominate it completely. Why? Because already they were proven wrong by the Soviet Union and by its people. And I would like to say one final thing before this presentation ends. It is related to the church, because the Germans invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941, and it was a complete coincidence that there were two holidays which were on the date of 22nd of June 1941. It was the day of all the saints in the Orthodox Christian Church, and this gave hope to a lot of people because they knew that if someone was invaded on the day of All Saints, that person would receive the help of Mary, Mother of Jesus herself, and of all the angels, and of all of the sky. And the other holiday was the day of Ivan Kupala. This is a holiday which is which is celebrated usually in Belarus or Ukraine. Usually, when the holiday happens, there are campfires, there are fires that are lit up, very big fires around which the people dance, chant, sing. And the problem is that since the Germans invaded on the same day that this holiday happened, they saw the whole border lit up. Why? Because after you light up the fire, a lot of the people go swimming in the lake, and the border was on a lake, the Western Bug, which is in Belarus today. And so the German bombers and the German soldiers saw perfectly where to go. So, thank you very much for listening. Oh, and sorry, I forgot to say one more point. I talked about Major Gabriel. He survived the war. He went to a concentration camp. He lost his left leg because of the torture that was conducted upon him, the experiences that were conducted upon him. But he survived the war, and he was one of the main people who started to talk about the Brest Fortress after the war, who said, this happened, you have to remember this. And he was one of the few people who, when he came back to the Soviet Union, was put back into the army. So he got his rank, he got his payment, he was even promoted to the rank of colonel by Stalin personally. Stalin personally said that this man is a great man, that he must be respected in every way possible. Does anyone have any questions? Questions can be in English or Russian. Of course, могут быть на английском, на русском языке.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was a great presentation. Thank you a lot. It was really objective. Like I like it very much. Maybe one thing I maybe wanted to add about the point of what was it? August 22nd, 1941.
June 22nd.
August regarding the parade. 1939. The parade, yeah.
22nd September.
22nd of September, yeah. It's a little bit, there are still debates about this issue, as probably a lot of people know. Some people claim it's parade, some people claim it's like official dividing of troops and official ceremony of hanging the fortress over. So yeah, it's like a little bit still debatable issue, but
Yeah.
probably the only one that I can notice in this presentation. Thank you once again.
Yes, that issue is very heavily debated upon because both countries do not want to remember that their soldiers paraded together. No one wants to remember what happened back then, but we have to remember what happened back then. If we don't remember what happened back then, we won't know what to do in the future. If we say goodbye to our history, if we forget about our history, we will be blind. We can't move into the future without our history, without our past. It's impossible. That's why we still exist. Because we remember our history very well.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much.
Спасибо.